is Andrew Pullen. He is the senior software developer in the School of Computing Science at Carleton University.
Okay. So our topic today is going to be basically in-lab exam infrastructure. The idea is in computer science. We haven't tried this until recently. We found that students really didn't capture the experience of what they did in the course. So in terms of what they were doing in their assignments and their major projects, you get them to do a lot of coding and debugging of code and integrating code pieces and libraries, and then suddenly you plop them down with a pencil and see if they can wear out their hand, which they all do. I was in computer science and I didn't know how to write anymore, and then someone asked me to write for 3 hours. So one of our faculty expressed some interest in having a secured setup to do all this in the lab. And I'm going to just talk about it for a few minutes at the beginning of this session. It is a birds of a feather, so the idea is it's meant to be primarily a discussion. So we implemented our sort of quick little infrastructure just to make it work, and with the intention of making it more robust in the future. But we haven't had much uptake from other faculty. There just hasn't been a lot of interest, and so that was one of the reasons why I suggested this session, just to see what other people are doing and see what kind of ideas are out there, what people might have done to entice faculty to be more involved in this. We do have on the engineering side of Carleton, they do have a number of faculty now that are doing some more in-lab exam stuff. So we've talked to them a bit as well. But I thought we'd have a discussion here. Okay, so just diving right in. Basically, it was 2 years ago that the faculty first came to us to express interest in this, and initially it was just for a basic Java programming course, so like a second year basic algorithms and data structures, that type of stuff. And it's expanded significantly since. We use it for an app development course with Android, and we use it for a bunch of different networking courses, so networking between apps, networking between just general computer science applications. And we did a really sort of strange variation that didn't use our infrastructure, but he did use a variation that used it for iOS development. Of course, we don't have a Mac lab, so in that case, the students in that course are all required to have Mac devices, so it was done on their own machines, and I'll just touch on that briefly. So we're in a lab that has, in a variety of labs, there's 200 machines in total, but we primarily use an 80 machine teaching lab that's sort of dedicated to teaching and tutorials. We have Active Directory on the back end, like I'm sure everyone does for Windows, and that's basically the infrastructure that we leverage. And we did a whole bunch of automated scripts, so we wanted to be able to obviously, we need to collect all those exams. We didn't want to follow the model that engineering was using at the time, where it was the students would push up their assignments at the end, so they'd have to know a process to do that. We wanted it to be very hands-off for the students. We have some scripts that automatically collect the required information. We need to know their student number and their name and stuff like that. And we also want to track a bunch of specs about the computer, exactly where they were sitting, and then if they moved to another computer due to a failure or something. We also don't want them to have to worry about, for example, when they log in for the Android course, they had to install the libraries for Android into Eclipse to be able to do it, and we didn't want them to worry about that. So again, that was scripts, but again, that's something that could have been done with an image push if we really wanted to do it. And then there's also the server-side monitoring. So in addition to collecting the information at the end, we also basically do snapshots along the way and keep track of what where the users are. So I actually am either on Twitter or on email with the faculty, and we're just constantly back and forth saying, okay, this person just sat down there, this person was late, they're good to go, and oh, this person just went down, so they're moving to this computer. So it works fairly well, but it's an ad hoc thing. It's not like we went out and really thought this out in advance. So the process is student logs into the workstation with a specialized account. So they actually have an exam account that they use for this. The scripts run, some are automated, some are on demand, depending if something has to be run after they do something else. The student does the exam, I keep an eye on them while they're doing it. They log out, they exit the lab. At that point, they're done. They don't have to do anything else. we collect all the files, and then the faculty member, he verifies everything, makes sure it's all good, everything was saved safely over the network, and then those machines where the data is, it all gets locked down temporarily, and then once that brief interlude is over, we purge the machines of any of that exam stuff. So the iOS app was just a little variation. So again, as I mentioned, we didn't have any of the a Mac lab to do it in, although we tried to do it with business, but they didn't have the infrastructure we needed, but they do have a Mac lab that we might try to use in the future. So the neat thing was that the students had to install this recording program. So basically it recorded everything they did. It took a video of what they were doing during the exam. It recorded their keystrokes and all that. So just saved it in a neat little file. And then that got uploaded with the data, that like the actual exam code that they wrote in the files. So, and I guess he looked through all those, I don't know. So that's a 3-hour exam times, I think, 22 students in that. So at least you have a backup. You have a good archive of what went on. So it sort of solves the problem in a scenario where it was app development. It was all based on accessing the internet. Like there was a remote server they had to connect to. So it wasn't a case where we could lock them down tight and make sure that they're not doing anything and block all the wireless. Like they had to be able to connect. So we had to have some other way of monitoring them in some ways. So a bit of feedback. Faculty member, this particular faculty member is sold on it and is always trying to sell it to his colleagues. So, and he's using it for all of his courses now in some part. There's a couple courses that can't use it for everything, but every one of his courses does it for something at least. And his biggest takeaway, like it doesn't really save him time or anything. It's still a lot of effort to design these exams, and it's a different methodology for marking. But he really feels he gets a better appreciation of how the students understand the concept. It's like it can be easy for some students, the right type of student, to go in and sort of work their way through a theoretical question, or give them a piece of code and they'll sort of give you an answer. You can figure out the answer that the faculty's looking for in a way. Here it's harder to fake. You really need to show, like if he gives you a library and says these components need to be integrated in this way, and he has a test case and a unit testing at the end that he's going to run against it, you're not really faking that. You either know that or you don't know that. So, and then you still have all the theory questions. Like he still will ask just a written question or multiple written questions. And he also likes that because the students can actually write more. So he can usually ask more in-depth questions about just, okay, why did this concept evolve? Like why did apps start doing this? So sort of from the more theoretical aspects of the course. And he said it's nice because he can actually read it. Some of the handwriting is pretty bad. And so the students really enjoy it. They love the fact that they're coding their exams. Like I've had students come by afterwards, and they just ask the faculty, like, who does all this in behind? And they've actually come up and thanked me for doing it because they said, why don't we do this for all of our courses? So, and like I said, they lament the fact that no one else is doing it yet, but no one's been able to convince the faculty. So that's pretty much it. The faculty member gave me a few things just to mention. Said that for anyone looking to do this, you can save potentially a bit of time in the marking. Like you don't have to read through pseudocode and stuff and try to see if they know what they're talking about. You're actually testing the code. But it takes a lot more effort to design an assignment that uses that sit down and say, okay, you want to show that they know how to integrate these things. So it's not just, okay, show me some code for doing something. You actually have to think out the process, and you have to program it yourself, and then you have to test it thoroughly to make sure, okay, if I'm asking them to do this and I'm asking them to use these libraries, is it actually going to come out the way that it's expected? And he usually gets the TAs to run through it from scratch as well, just to see what it's like. But a lot of care has to be taken for that. So anyway, that's the end of my sort of little informal presentation. I guess I'll open the floor to questions and comments, and I can talk more about things, of course, if people have specific questions. Is there anyone here who's actually doing this type of stuff already? Yeah.
We have some classroom we can secure the fact that students can do.
Okay.
We're trying to see if we running other pieces of software. And so one question I have for you is when you're setting up exams like that, you need to decide what you want to allow
Yes.
and what you want to block. So what did you want to block? What did you want to allow?
Basically, the great thing about building it on group policy, Active Directory, was we locked everything. Like, there's absolutely no access to begin with, and then we selectively would grant like the ability for Eclipse, and then the base program for Eclipse, and then we'd add individual Java implementations as needed, the command prompt if required, and just basically one little thing at a time. We'd often sit down, the faculty member would give me this code and say, okay, they need to be able to do this, and I'd sit down and figure out, I'd code something, run it, and I get an error here, oh, it needs this sub-application of Eclipse, so we'd add that, and then I do the next thing, and then the next thing, and then eventually I get to the end and we'd have success. And then we'd try a few variations to see if there was anything in there, like if the student did it a slightly different way, if they'd run into another roadblock with some sub-program of Eclipse. In some instances, we had to open up the entire Eclipse hierarchy of programs. So there's a lot of little mini programs with Eclipse that do all the different pieces of functionality. So it's not one monolithic program like Adobe Photoshop or something. So it was a fair amount of testing. Sometimes we just had to open that up and trust that the students didn't have enough time to figure out how to use some of those applications in the interim. And then we'd sometimes open up specific network ports for when they need access to the internet, like to communicate with the app servers and stuff like that. So.
Now, do you make sure that they wouldn't, like if students, if they wanted to cheat, they would use all kinds of things, like they could cheat with Dropbox, with text messaging services?
Yeah, most of those applications can be open. So like you can open a web browser or something like that. You can open Dropbox. You couldn't open a USB key with those programs installed on it. Like all that was completely locked. We tested it as thoroughly as we could. Like we tried those types of things, and like there's even trying to run things like you can run programs from the command prompt that weren't allowed like through the group policy rules. So you can like run Firefox from the command prompt because you could access the command prompt. That wouldn't work. It would still generate an error for you. So that was one of the reasons why it was nice building it on the Windows architecture, because you can leverage, it's so easy in group policies, just say lock it down, don't let them do anything, and then just selectively figure out what you needed to add back in. So,
were you also recording every keystroke and
no, not
on the Windows one? Because it sort of makes sense, right? You could tell this.
And that's something we've talked about the possibility of doing. So
because if the students know that they can be audited, they'll probably be a bit.
So it's one of those things like we have lots of little ideas like that on the table. If we sort of make this bigger, like it's hard with his fairly small groups as it is. Like we're not talking ginormous 200 student classes. We're typically talking 20 to 30 students in his courses. So it's a closer knit group. So it's not the type of group that we have huge concerns about there being rampant cheating. So we haven't gone into that aspect of it yet. So is there possibilities of doing stuff in there? Yep. Like there's definitely, we want to lock it down more. So.
And they can store files on the network, right?
No, they can't access the network. So what we do is if they lose their computer, I can use my server-side stuff to sync the files to the next computer that they log into if they need to recover those files.
So where are the files stored?
Locally on the system. So we basically allow them access to a single directory on the system that just they and the administrator has access to.
And how do you collect?
On the server, I have a script that automatically goes and grabs all the data from those folders. Okay. So it's a bit dependent. We have to do a bit of hacking in the programs. Like we have to rewrite the Eclipse workspace, which by default for all of our accounts, the default workspace for pretty much all of our software is the network share that they own, so that all their files get saved there. So we have to make sure for that account it's pointing, we dynamically change the workspace to be that specific folder on that computer that's been allowed to them. And so we've run into a couple of problems with programs that don't have that capability. So we would just have to basically go issue them to that particular directory that we want them in, and then run the program from in there, from the command prompt in essence, and that would mean it's operating out of that space instead of wherever in the profile we normally have as its sort of workspace by default. So it's definitely been a bit of playing around. Eclipse made it easy, but some of the other software not so easy. So. But and that's the thing, part of the reason why I wanted to do this discussion, because I have no idea if this is the best way of doing these things. So it's are there better ways of doing it? I know with engineering, some of the stuff they're doing, like they lock down the network and everything, like they don't physically have network access until the end when they are just plugged in and submit the assignment. So, but obviously in our scenarios, with it being used by many networking courses, it's not possible. So, question up there?
I'm just wondering if you faced any issues around accessibility.
Yeah, the question's about accessibility accommodation, and we have. So we have the Paul Menton Center at Carleton University, and they're responsible for providing an accessible environment for whatever student needs come up. So in this particular case, they had computers that are specialized for students that I didn't actually know what the requirements were, but I helped them install the software, and they had their own computers available. So those students were actually over there, and a TA was with them. And then they, I don't think we were able to lock those down because I think those were on the central computing network, but they had, the center provides sort of a monitor that is there anyway that keeps an eye on them, and the TA was with them. So it was sort of more of a trust mechanism there for that. But again, if it became a big issue, I guess we'd have to look more into securing that model as well. But the Paul Menton Center has been great for that, though. So
how many
another question?
Accessibility
No,
Yep. Go ahead.
Like my question is like, what if the numbers of students requiring those accommodations increases?
Yeah, over there, I think the particular lab they were in only had like 5 computers. So at this point, it hasn't been an issue, but we would have to consider it, whether there was a way to, well, if we had that many users in a course that were in the Paul Menton Center to begin with, at that point, we might actually be considering modifying the image on one of our own labs to be more accessible. So, and then we could leverage that. But sometimes it's not just an issue of how they interact with it. It's simply that we have the lab booked for 3 hours for a midterm or a final, but this person's being granted 6 hours to do it. So because of that, we have a tutorial coming right after our exam, so we can't have them in there. And that's the reason why they're in the Paul Menton Center, not because of the some sort of physical accessibility issue. So
The reason I'm asking is that, well, we have U of C, we're just in the process of looking and evaluating the needs along the partly like you, we've done some hack solution at the beginning because the requirements to us initially came, but we soon realized that that solution cannot really scale. For example, computer science exams, they want things. You mentioned already the Macintosh platform. So we are looking into a solution to all those issues with across all computer labs so that you scale up and down as.
yeah, it's an issue we haven't banged into much yet. I'm glad you brought it up. It's something we're going to have to consider. I like that you brought up the Linux issue. That's something we're looking at as well. We already run a lot of Linux VMs on our Windows OS, and we haven't had to use it for the lab exams. But that was one of the things we had considered briefly, how well we can lock down the VM within that, like that sort of sandbox within the Windows host, and how the group policy affects that. And then what we're going to need to do within that image, like are we going to be able to use the general course image, or are we going to have to provide a more bare bones that minimizes the number of applications they have access to? Like obviously some stuff like network and everything, it's easy for us to be restrictive because we can control it on the host end if we need to. So, but I'm actually giving a talk with Andrew tomorrow about our Linux virtual machines, so that'll probably cover a couple of those things a little bit. So, but another question.
You're talking about, for example, doing some testing in advance with an instructor assignment. How much time, and you said, but so what's the turnaround time that piece. So from the moment the instructor says, I want
Mhm.
to, you are ready to, how much advance notice do you
The first time we did it,
need? Now.
oh, now?
Now.
Oh,
Now.
it, most of the cases, it's been leveraging applications like Eclipse and stuff that we're already using. He forgot to tell me one semester, and I had it up and running a few hours before he needed it. So it was pretty quick, and we had no problem whatsoever. It was just going through all the steps of testing to make sure nothing had changed. Like obviously the image had evolved since he had done that the previous year, so making sure everything still worked. And other than an updated Eclipse reference that had to be changed, that was it. So when we have gone into some other applications, like I can't even think of them off the top of my head.
Any AutoCAD?
No, we haven't done without, not built with AutoCAD yet. So that's a big one.
You have Helen?
Well, that's on the future.
Yes. I think might as well just jump right there.
Yeah, so I put that up there, AutoCAD, MATLAB, like some of these that are just